Okay.
Okay.
All right, cool. All right, so let's get going. So, for example, Chris was asking me about past books because she wants to, get involved with Audible and things like that. Anyway, it's hard to find time sometimes to do books. So whether Kindle or Audible, or even there's apps for libraries where you can check them out for free and listen to them.
Can you hold just for a second? I'm on a meeting and I'm trying to.
Did you want me to hold up, Cynthia?
No, I'm trying to get myself on mute.
Oh, okay. Anyway, these are the past books, great books that we hit. And so if anybody wants to know about some past books and wants to try and catch up, I mean, these are great. Silent Spring, Rachel Carson, it's a classic, goes way back. Just really turned me on to some of the things I wasn't really, I guess, that interested in my past life. Saving Us, to me, Saving Us was the best book that we've read, including, to me, perhaps better than even this month's book. Catherine Hayhoe, she's just an unbelievable person and an unbelievable climate scientist. The New Climate War, we did Michael Mann, who of course predicted emissions issues, way back, I think in the 90s or something, and he was a real pioneer. And so he's pretty active still. Regenesis, George Monbiot, which talks about regenerative agriculture and things like that. And I thought that was a fantastic book about RA and soil health and the concerns he had about things like livestock and the ability to perpetuate that. Finding the Mother Tree, Susan Simard. How to Save Our Planet, Mark Maslin. Hey, that's a real short one that really gets to the points pretty quickly too. If you're looking for super detail, it's not there, but that's not his intention. All We Can Save.
I really like that one, All We Can Save.
Yeah, Johnson and Wilkinson. Yeah, that was a good one. And I think, Pam, wasn't that the one where one of the two of them, maybe it was Catherine, I'm not sure, basically she just went offline for like 5 years because the more she learned about climate change, the more it freaked her out. She couldn't sleep at night. She couldn't deal with it. And it just shows how so many people that really do care about it, get out of the, advocacy and whatever, because it seems just so overwhelming and they see politicians not doing anything. So I think that was the one. Another one, No One is Too Small to Make a Difference. Thunberg, The Green New Deal, Jeremy Rifkin, and How to Avoid a Climate Disaster, Bill Gates. I was a bit disappointed at Bill Gates. He had some good points, but Pam, you were involved. Do you agree it was a little disappointing?
Yeah, I just thought he put too much of his hopes on technological breakthroughs, and I was worried that he was a little too enamored of solutions that we may not want to explore.
Yeah.
He even mentioned geoengineering.
I know. Yeah.
And that really worried me.
Yeah. All right, so let's move ahead. Saul, as you probably all know, Australian-American inventor, renewable electricity advocate, co-founder of a bunch of companies, been around a while, PhD in nanotechnology at MIT, Australian-American, and he also wrote The Big Switch, which I haven't read yet. So, for anybody who doesn't know this, I just wanted to put up our teams here that we have at Climate Reality. So if you want to become involved in one of these issues, whether it's about transportation, about plastics or whatever, I'll make sure everybody that was invited to this session, as well as people obviously that have attended the session, get a list, because if you hear things from the book or from this session tonight, and you want to join a team to actually do something about these things, we got a team for practically any of these things. So anyway, I just wanted to put that out. So right away in Saul's book, I'll take the lead on a few of the things in his first chapter or two, and we can chat about all these. The first position he's taking And much of this is almost verbatim right out of the book, courtesy of Kindle. Eliminating greenhouse gases. He says it's the only serious option is to electrify everything. He's not saying it's the only thing you do, but he is saying electrifying everything is key, because something like 75% of emissions are from the machines that we use every day, like our cars. And please interrupt me if we need to stop on any one of these and talk more about it. This is supposed to be a dialogue, and sometimes I go too far with discussion. So the next one would be to hit our climate goals. We have to have 100% adoption of these electric solutions for households, whether it's electric vehicles, heat pumps, and so forth. I'll summarize his list a little bit later. This is your personal zero carbon infrastructure, as he's saying. His third point here in the introduction is massive generation and transmission of infrastructure build out is necessary to decrease these emissions. That'd be not only expanding the electric grid to be 3 to 4 times, as it says here on the slide, but we have to have new financing mechanisms to make all this happen. And we have to have stability, because much of the new energy generation is intermittent. It's not like a coal plant, which basically goes full tilt all the time. It's intermittent depending if the sun and the wind and all of that stuff is happening. And then
I have a question on that one.
Yeah.
So, you know, I've always thought if the grid is all unified across the US except for Texas, then power sources like hydro in the Pacific Northwest and nuclear and whatever all contribute to the grid. But there was somewhere in the book that said, but you lose some of the efficiency by transmitting it over long distances. But from a geek like him, I was expecting, well, what's the trade-off of going to a more renewable source that might be a little further away than the nearby coal plant?
Yeah.
And what's the trade-offs of, you know, losing some efficiency from transmission versus renewable? And it's a hard kind of concept to get my mind around.
Yeah, and your point earlier is a really good one, that he's really thinking and writing like an engineer that he is, okay? Because he didn't connect the dots like a communication type person would. But closely in the book, if you read it, he says, while intermittency of solar and things like that can depend on the grid and should depend on the grid, and we need to build out the grid, he says it's equally important, and he does some graphs in there to make sure that it's a decentralized environment, so that, you know, people that have rooftops that get sun need to have panels. There needs to be wind farms, solar farms, so partially centralized, but local regional centralization of solar power. And obviously, like in my home, 94% of my energy does not come from the utility at all, except in December when there's no sun. But, you know, overall, it works out well. So it's critical that what Bruce said is true, that we have a good built out grid, but it's also true that we don't want a centralized environment like we had before solar started to come in. Okay, make sense?
I can tell you from my work with the Department of Energy that we would look at about as much as 30% loss transmitting over long distance. So it's extremely, in fact, there was a period of time where we were looking at neighborhood nuclear generation. And of course, everybody was not in my backyard, right? But no, it's very expensive to transmit energy over long distances.
And when you say long distance, are you saying 100 miles, 500 miles, 1,000 miles?
You know, I don't have an exact figure, but certainly over 100 miles, you're gonna have substantial loss.
Yeah.
And it's just resistance, you know, the wires.
That just makes sense.
Well, how far is Prairie State well, that's just going into the grid, but Naperville's getting offsets from its investment in Prairie State, and that's far away from
That's
you.
way down south, way down south.
But it's just an exchange of electrons.
We're losing a lot. It's not just that it's cold. We're losing a lot of efficiency with that in the city of Naperville. You're right.
Question for Dave Rice.
Yeah,
So is there hope that there could be an improvement in technology with transmission? It's a matter of resistance, you're saying, but as we're trying to innovate with so many things, is that a possibility that can be increased?
well, I think the way to think of it is that, I mean, the reason that we transmitted energy over such long distances is because we had centralized power plants. And the advantage of wind and solar, et cetera, is that you can distribute it.
Mhm.
And it really changes the entire, and the guy touched on this in his book, is that it really kind of changes, not only are you using power from the grid, but you're contributing to it.
Yes.
And so it really changes the dynamics of power distribution, really.
Especially in a place like Africa,
Yeah.
where there is no infrastructure set. So
Yeah.
Yeah.
And there
Well,
are,
it-
excuse me, there
pardon.
are super grids being built right now too, that are way more efficient than the 30-year-old grids and
Oh, yeah.
20-year-old grids that we have now. So to answer your question, it is more efficient, but it also is going to be better because we can depend on local sources for these things as
Okay.
well.
all right, thank you.
Okay, so we need to move, must be with grid neutrality. And this is a way to explain what we just got through talking about. The generation, the transmission, storage must be grid neutral, where households, businesses have solar panels on their roofs and utilities operate as equals. That's going to be critical to the future. The scary thing, he ended up, part of his positions that he took here was many people are giving up, but we can't do this. I'm sorry, reaching 1.5 degrees C or 2.7 Fahrenheit is now not possible. He's just, no matter what anybody else says, he's saying it's not possible unless we have negative emissions. And one could argue, what is that? I would argue, and I think most of us in climate reality would argue, that trees and things like that are good kinds of negative emissions, sinks. But carbon capture is not a good way. And that's upsetting that the Biden administration is embracing carbon capture, and we got to stop it from coming to Illinois. But I think that's our position, isn't it, Pam and Bruce?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Uh-huh.
Yeah, on the other hand, though, for small emitters who cannot join the zero emission, like airlines, like United Airlines said, we're going to just try to offset our emissions by, buying these things that suck, carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere, but it's just to neutralize our emissions. And that might be okay, but that's just one company to do it. It's not going to work as a systematic solution across the board.
Yeah, and it's got to be real, what do you call it, purchases, not this fake stuff that's going on now.
Right.
All right, many people are giving up, but we can do this with a wartime mentality. So he actually, either here or later on, he talks about what Kerry said. Kerry had an organization, World War Zero. I don't know if it's still going, but he quotes that because that's kind of the mentality that we have to have. And I think that's very good. I think there's key points in everything he is saying that can really influence what climate reality does. The fact is, there's no time left, and he's saying it's more likely to be 3.6 Fahrenheit or 4.8 Fahrenheit, which means the Arctic is 15, 20 degrees. We have to be really frightened about that, because we are seeing what happens with snowstorms when the what's it called, the
Polar vortex.
the polar vortex comes down because of the jet stream. Sorry, the jet stream gets wobbly and all of that kind of thing.
Mhm.
Okay. He takes these positions in the introduction too, that the COVID-19 pandemic was a spectacular example of failure. And he says it's like climate change. We've seen it. We knew it was coming. The scientists were predicting bad stuff. In fact, COVID-19 is based on SARS-CoV-2, which is a version of SARS-CoV-1, which killed a lot of people in the early 2000s and was actually more deadly, but it got contained better back then. We should have been prepared. The politicians failed us, he said, and things we had to do 20 days before the pandemic hit. The equivalent of that is 20 years ahead. For
Yeah,
climate
that really stood out to me.
Really. So he had a drawing in the book, okay? And I found a better one, and here it is, because it's animated. I hope you can see it okay. Is that working for you there?
Yeah.
Yep.
You might have to, your little windows might have to be moved. But this is COVID-19, that if you do proper mitigation, you stay in the green zone here and you're fine. And without mitigation, lots of people die. And the only difference is, instead of being, 2 or 3 years of death and sickness and everything, we're talking about 3 or 4 or 5 decades of death and sickness, maybe even 100 years or more, right?
Mm-hmm.
And what's interesting is what the IPCC said about this. I didn't know this before. The only difference between COVID-19 and the pandemic and the climate crisis curves is that the time scale is different. Whoa, is there a message here or what?
Yeah.
Okay. Right, moving ahead. Then he's got this slide, I think on the next page or whatever. I thought we could chat about this for a little. Talking about millions of tons of CO2 emissions by sector and where all this is coming from. And his focus is that he's talking about in the book, the 85%, which is the combustion of fossil fuels. I don't think he's trying to ignore any of these other things, like, livestock is terrible and manure and all these other bad things. We got to work on everything, but he wants to make sure that combustion of fossil fuels got to really stop. Make sense?
Yeah, well, that's the hard one to do because
Yeah,
the
machines.
companies have so much power.
Yeah, I know. So he says that we've arrived, I quote him, we've arrived at the last moment when we can shift global energy infrastructure without passing the 1.5, 2.7, or to 2C to 3.6 Fahrenheit temperature rise. We can't rely on fantasy technologies. I don't remember him calling carbon capture fantasy or geoengineering, but I have a feeling that's what he was talking about. Maybe I missed it. I don't know. Make sense?
Yep.
I thought that is what he meant, but
Yeah,
I don't know if he said it or not, but I felt like it was some sort of refutation of Bill Gates.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think you're right.
Too. I mean, he's saying, technologies can do anything, but
Yeah, that's Bill Gates. Right.
we
Okay.
don't have time for one thing.
Yeah. All right. So moving right along, he has this chart in the book. This is a colored better chart, but it's exactly the same chart as he had. And I wanted to put it up here. It's a good one because he was really trying to prove a point about how urgent this thing is. And a lot of people don't understand this. So if you look over here and you can see the carbon, the CO2 in the atmosphere has gone up, over time, annual world emissions. And this is where we are. We're sitting here, right here, precisely here. And
No, we're in 2020. That's further over to the right.
I'm sorry, 2020.
So see the little dip? See the little dip on the thing at the top?
Yeah.
Keep on going. Keep on going. Wait, no, way up. Go to the right. Look where 2020 is.
2000. I'm sorry. Maybe I didn't say this right. But I was saying, if we had, this is an if. If we had started decreasing our emissions 4% a year back then, we would have had an easy time. And there would not be an emergency in a climate crisis right now. It'd be well in hand if in the George Bush years, et cetera, the Clinton years, we had done these things. So let's move forward. if we start in 2020, Bruce, here we are.
Yeah,
We're in
okay.
2020. If we start in 2020, we only have 10 years instead of 30 years left to do the 50% cut. And if we look and see where we are actually right now today, or, you know, in 2026, in another couple of years, we'll have to have a 50% cut, you know, which is like 10% every year, at least since 2021, we have to be doing that, which he says is not possible. So we have to treat this. He puts up in his book, since the steep impossible, we have to have negative emissions pulling the CO2. This is Robbie Andrews' chart that everybody uses, including Saul. And we have to have World War Zero, which is what he says and what John Kerry has been saying for a long time. Okay? Everybody get this chart?
Mm-hmm.
Emergency. Okay. Then he says, now I'm critical of Saul because he sprays this all over his book. He makes lists of things that you need to do. As you can imagine, it frustrated me. So I created this one slide that has it all. Okay. So I hope
I'd like to use that.
exactly. Okay. Thank you. In fact, it's better than one I use. I had to search high and low for the one you and I and Bruce talked about probably a year ago. But this is new and improved, okay? Because I took Saul's things and I made sure they were captured. So fossil fuel vehicles last 12 to 15 years and they're only 20% efficient. You got to take it serious. It's got to go. 27% of emissions are transportation. And of that, 59% of those emissions are our cars, our pickup trucks, and our SUVs. That's a fact. And another 20% of it would be public transit, buses, school buses, and all of that. So we have to have 100% battery electric vehicles, and at least they're 80% efficient, and even more with, if you count regenerative braking, which they do, which puts them up close to 90% efficient.
You know, Tom, the thing that I was struck by though was after he, here and there, as he laid out the dirty products and the clean products, he made it, to me, he made it sound less urgent to do something because he kept saying, you know, when it's time to replace your car, get an electric car. But he wasn't saying, this is so urgent, which it seems to me he was saying in other parts of the book. He was saying, when you have to replace your water heater or your car, that's the time to electrify.
Yeah.
And I thought, well, wait a minute, if things are this bad, then why are we saying to people, you don't have to make these changes now. You can wait until you were going to do a replacement anyway, which just seemed like a contradictory.
But Pam, I would look at it this way though.
Yeah.
If everybody took that pledge to every car from here on out, every car you buy has to be electric, then instead of 5% of new cars being electric, it would be 100%. So it would, you know, I understand what you're saying, but if you look at it in a disaggregate sense, yourself, it doesn't sound very powerful. But if you look at it based on if every person now shopping for a car buys an electric car, the fleet would change. It would take less than 6 or 7 years to totally change over.
Yeah, that's a good point, Bruce. I think
the problem is that percent, everybody doesn't replace it with.
Yeah, but they won't. See, that's the thing.
So it's up to government, or in this case, I think industry will do it. They're
pushing. Yeah.
They're pushing to, at a certain point, only sell electric.
Yeah, but it's going to take a few years for them to get there. Like I was very encouraged that Dodge has decided that they're going to replace their huge engine, you know, Charger and Avenger, all their muscle cars with electric. That was a great view, but it's going to take them a few years to do that. Meanwhile, they're on TV trying to sell these gas guzzling race.
They gotta have money to finance their transition.
Right.
But
they
that's
also
bad.
they're gonna wanna sell everything
know.
that's left.
Right, exactly.
Well,
So
this-
that's the problem.
I don't know if you noticed, but we're at about 6% of EVs and new registrations. I think he was quoting as 2 or 3%. I mean, just.
Well,
this
he
looks like
wrote it a couple years ago.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah. So anyway, moving right along, I'm very comfortable with what automakers are doing. I'm not comfortable with the Biden administration, how they're treating batteries, but we'll see in a few days. Anyway, let's move on. Water heaters last 10 years. Please, his point is, please don't replace it with a regular water heater. Get a solar or heat pump water heater. Your clothes dryer will last 13 years if it's a gas one. And I probably should have put methane gas clothes dryer, like the one I have right now, to go to an electric dryer. Methane gas furnace. I don't like natural in the word natural gas. So anyway, you get what I mean. Heat pump or a mini split. If you have to keep your gas heater for the next 5 or so years, at least get a mini split so the gas heater hardly runs except when the mini split, the heat pump can't handle the load. You know, that's an approach. Methane gas stoves got to go to electric induction stoves. Thermostats that last 30, 35 years, intelligent thermostats. Plastics, especially one-time use, need to go to recyclable, reusable containers.
I'd like to interrupt you here,
Yeah,
just on
please.
the first 5 or whatever, that's all home based.
Yeah.
And I just want to let you know that my son just bought a house, a bungalow, a 100-year-old bungalow that somebody went in just last year, just 6 months ago, flipped the entire place, redid it, and put an all new gas, dryer, gas, water heater.
Oh,
Yeah, and what is, and I'm thinking, and this flipper has about 20 homes that he's doing. That's his avocation. So I'm thinking to myself, I know California and a few other states won't let that happen, but just think about Chicago and all these home flippers that are out there and all the housing stock we have, and we're just perpetuating these gas. It's frustrating.
And that's why Climate Reality is going to continue to support legislation to stop the deployment of natural gas, right? There's bills. We're trying to do that right now.
Right.
And it's critical. And a lot of people don't understand that. But not only is a gas stove bad for your indoor health, from what I understand, or that's the way it looks.
Yeah.
But it's methane, which is 20 to 80 times more powerful than carbon dioxide. In fact, I don't think it's this book, but I read recently that if we want to avoid a cascade where different bad things that happen, like floods and all of these things, cascade and work together to really make this whole climate situation much worse, the best way to do it is to focus on, again, you may not buy this, focus on the elimination of methane initially. Long-term, carbon dioxide is more important, but in the short term, methane is more important. I don't know if you buy that, but I'm just sharing what I've heard.
Yeah.
Okay, your thermostat, plastics, reusable, everything goes in the trash versus recycling. So we have to have an economy that depends on recycling and composting and all of that kind of stuff. And I'm very happy in the EV world, most of the battery manufacturers, like Redwood Materials, companies like that, are going to recycle this stuff. We don't, any of these naysayers that say, those batteries are terrible things and they're just going to end up in landfills. They're not. There's too much precious stuff inside those batteries for that to happen, okay? That's the good news. The bad news for the companies like Redwood Materials is they can't get enough old batteries to recycle because they're lasting so long in EVs. So anyway, all right, poisonous high emissions home products, the products you use, we're looking at labels now, common cheap home insulation. We did insulation some years ago, and what we had was horrible. It must have been cheap to build a house with this insulation, but it was really bad for us. We had drafts, all those kind of things. So Then, of course, incandescent and CFL light bulbs versus LED. Fossil fuel power plants last 50 years. It's no wonder they don't want to retire those darn things. They haven't written them off yet, right? All
Well,
the
they also have these huge reserves
yes,
that will be what, sunken assets, lost assets, whatever.
they're stranded assets. Yeah,
Stranded. I mean, that
exactly.
gigantic part of it.
Their balance sheet has this. A lot of people don't know the oil in the ground. That's on their balance sheet. They got to mine that and burn it, or else their companies go down the drain. So, you know, he does recommend ways to deal with that divestment, but he was pretty vague on all of it, as far as I'm concerned. Anyway.
So, oh, go ahead, Tom. I just wanted to make one comment on this. If we're gonna, I think this is an excellent chart, but what I'd like is a third column and say, how much does a household or an individual lower their greenhouse gas emissions with each of these actions? So for the first line, I know it's approximately 3 metric tons. And I think this sounds like it's pretty close in order of magnitude of how much of a carbon decarbonization benefit you get. And so that would be the third column.
I think we ought to do that, Bruce. That's a great idea. I know for the first one up there, a typical gas car is 25%. I'm sorry, typical EV is 25% of the emissions of a typical gas car. That's on averages.
Right. So I've calculated it's a car is 4.6 metric ton. A car driven 13,000 miles a year contributes 4.6 metric tons of greenhouse gases to the atmosphere. A battery car is 1.6, which account per year, which accounts for not only the initial startup, but the emissions from the grid to power.
Yes,
Overall, it's a 3 metric ton reduction.
And the making of the battery too. Okay.
Yeah, right. And the making of the battery.
We have to really be on top of those numbers, because naysayers, it's unbelievable what they do with they learn a little and they use it against.
Right.
Fossil fuel plants, forest and industrial farming versus regenerative agriculture. And this really bugs me, because 11% of our emissions is agriculture. Now we can electrify that with better, electric tractors and everything. I don't know if you know that one of the biggest tractor companies is coming out with EV tractors now.
Caterpillar?
Huh?
Caterpillar?
No. What's the other one?
Oh, Deere.
Deere.
It's John Deere.
They're on Facebook all the time. Green tractors and everything. It's really good to see to reduce that. But the way we do farming, it really has a lot of emissions, and there's a lot of methane and everything too in there. So I think it's critical, because we have Don in the RA group talking about how RA can actually absorb emissions. Well, they got to stop their emissions and then start absorbing it. So I think the potential there is really gigantic. Okay. Then there's the high emissions and unhealthy foods. We hardly ever talk about that. So really the answer to that, I mean, he brought that up, so I'm putting it on the page. The answer, he didn't say, I don't think he said My Plate anywhere, but if you look at the replacement of the food pyramid, it's called myplate.gov. And if you look at that, he doesn't say you can't have a hamburger. He's simply saying we have to really reduce beef and certain meats, the consumption of that, because number one, in this other book that Pam and I read, there's not enough ground on the earth for the amount of livestock we're going to need if we continue to have the meat consumption that we're having today, number one. And number two, it's high emissions, all of that, even if you could. So My Plate tries to put it in perspective, which is great. They do it from a health perspective, but I think there's a greenhouse gas aspect of that. Does that make sense, everybody?
Yep.
Yeah, cool. All right, then, of course, he does speak about this. He doesn't do a lot there, but he talks about the bank financing and the need for green banks and these kinds of things. But I didn't see too much on that. Did you?
No, and I think that it's more complicated than he's making it.
Yeah. I don't think it's his expertise. He knows he had to say something though, you know. Yeah.
He basically said, you know, in World War II with Churchill and the Lend-Lease Act, we got it together to pay for all this stuff. So we just need the same kind of
Right.
effort. But he black boxed it.
Well, he also talked about being able to borrow at lower interest rates to buy all this good stuff,
Oh, yeah, yeah.
which is important to
Yeah,
implement.
I think I might cover that. I think I took a couple of quotes out. So in the last 15 minutes or so that we have, here's a couple of quotes from him that I thought were incredible. The free market, as we know it, is not up to the task of keeping the world below 2 degrees Celsius, and absolutely has no chance of allowing us to hit 1.5. I believe this, and I liked it to see him just come right out and say it. If your toilet was broken and you called him and asked him what to do, I wouldn't tell you the free market would fix that. I'd say call a plumber. Well, our plumber is scientists. That's who we should be talking to, not politicians, right? Scientists. Is it right?
Somebody who knows how it works.
Yeah, but without the politicians to change the policies, you have nothing. You just have more knowledge.
They're in the way.
I
though.
think we have the knowledge already. I think exactly what Pam is saying. It's the people who will make the change happen. And it's
Oh, yeah.
economics and it's politics.
Yeah, I'm not saying we should ignore them. No. I agree. But that, you know, emphasizing the science, you know.
He's right,
yeah, but-
the free market is not, and the free market isn't really free because it's run and owned by a handful of people.
Yeah.
Right.
Look at the oil company.
We also have government, which puts in regulations, which brings in politics. So
Yeah.
the market and economy cannot be set. You know, the economy and politics in our world today can't be separated. It's not a matter of whether it's free market versus something else. It's much more nuanced than that.
Yeah, I think there's an additional problem here, and I don't want to sound too pessimistic, but he brought up the pandemic, and I think everybody on this call would probably agree that one of the reasons the pandemic wasn't addressed properly is because we weren't listening to scientists.
Yeah.
We weren't listening to reason because people have become selfish and unreasonable. If you look back at World War II, and shortly after World War II, there was the polio scare. Back during the polio scare, everybody lined up to get their vaccine or whatever it was, the sugar cube. And polio was beaten because we all listened to scientists. We didn't, you know, there was no hang Fauci from a tree back then. So
Yeah.
I think that what's getting me depressed is it's not just when he started talking about we just have to become more like they did in World War II. I think people back in the previous generation or 2 generations ago probably were more altruistic and were more likely to follow their leaders and instead of what we have today, which is fragmentation and a lot of disinfo, because that's how
Greed.
and
Greed,
greed.
the love of
And
money.
so it's really harder now than it was like back 60, 70, or 80 years ago.
Yeah. So
Right.
And we've seen people say, don't take my gas stove. They're making a big issue of that.
Right.
freedoms. The biggest enemy to the future is freedoms. It's so important to have freedoms, but it's also the bane if you have too much of it. It's like drinking or other things, right? It's
Right.
okay to have a drink or two, but if you drink all day, right, you're dead.
But I guess, you know, in the end, I mean, I come back to where I started at the beginning of our meeting, which is that while there are some really good suggestions in here for ways to behave personally differently and so on, but in the end, somehow it just feels overly simplistic in its analysis of things. It doesn't take into account the complexities of the political environment, the economic world we're living in, the social media world we're living in, all the forces that you're talking about that affect the decision making of
Right.
people. And so I feel like I've got a lot of ideas about what should happen, but nothing about how to contend with why it's not happening right now.
Yeah.
I was just listening to a speaker the other day and said something I thought was very insightful, is that social media and, you know, global networked information is not making us any more knowledgeable. It's making us less knowledgeable because we can choose to only listen to our little bubble, and we're not going out of that. And so, you know, in those ways, getting that scientific knowledge out, like Bruce, you're saying, it's not even a matter of, you know, character or altruistic or not. We're just in a world where we don't grow our knowledge and don't want to.
And actually what's left of mainstream news is also culpable here, because, you know, back when some of us were growing up in the 50s and the 60s, you had people who, like Walter Cronkite and, you know, Brinkley and Huntley and Brinkley or whatever, and they took very careful positions when they issued their opinions.
Yeah.
And when they did, it was, everybody knew it was very carefully decided upon and deliberated. Now all the media does is just repeat the disinfo that they find coming from certain politicians.
Yeah.
Well, this politician thinks this, and this politician thinks this. That's not, so Americans, even when they choose to approach mainstream media like the New York Times or the networks, they're getting these lies and disinfo repeated to them.
Yeah.
It's very hard.
See, you know, Pam, I agree with what you're saying about the book, but, you know, with all due respect, I think that you have an expectation that maybe is impossible for almost any book because of what Bruce was just saying. So much of it has to do with the ability to change, the politicians, the greed, the money. Aren't these things really key barriers to actually doing all this stuff, you know?
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So
and there's a question, have we made progress? I mean, so we have a number of, you know, I think the financial world is a huge player here that nobody touches ever because all that stuff is secret, where the money is going globally and where it's coming from. But haven't we seen progress in companies who have decided to invest in green things? I mean, I know that there's an underside to that, but we have seen progress, and I don't want us to lose sight that there hasn't been any progress like that. It's slow. It's unbelievably slow.
Barbara, but there's one thing, and I don't mean to be a stick in the mud about this. With all the great stuff going on with solar and wind and electric vehicles are starting to move ahead, the problem is the emissions from greenhouse gases are not going down at all. Right. In other words, because our energy generation, our energy needs are increasing because of the way we do business and our population and everything else, all this good stuff isn't causing the bad stuff to go away. So I think that's part of the challenge that we have. We have to do pretty dramatic things, and like you said earlier in the book, in order to be able to capture it, because, you know, incremental improvement's not going to do it.
Right.
I kind of
here it is.
I like that he, at the end, was emphasizing the big stuff, cars, solar panels, heat pumps, and saying they were more important than some of the little personal things.
Oh, yeah, that's true. Yeah.
And that we really need to push and be active and get out there and encourage young people to get out there.
Agreed. So speaking of efficiency, which we were just kind of talking about a little bit there, he says efficiency can solve a problem that relates to 10% supply. This is what gave us corporate average fuel economy, CAFE standards, and the Energy Star appliances. But as we've seen in the current moment, we need to get to carbon zero, and you can't efficiency your way to zero. It's just not going to happen.
I like that he compared it to the 70s.
Yeah.
president, and he was just trying to get the energy usage down 10%. And we still have that mindset of doing certain things to get it down somewhat. We have to get it all the way down.
All the way down.
Yeah. My favorite line that he used was that, well, this is not like Jimmy Carter's, you know, you should wear a cardigan in your house. Now you can still wear a cardigan if you like cardigans, but that's not going to get us there.
Exactly. Well, Jimmy Carter had.
I'm curious to throw this out. Like, what would it take to get our country, in addition to our world, to treat it as an epidemic? That amount of crisis.
We didn't treat the last epidemic that great, though.
That's really true.
Yeah, no, everybody would have to see it as a war, as an epidemic, and agree that it is. But that would mean Republicans and Democrats, et cetera, would have to agree on what the facts are about this. So, for example, we know that 97% of scientists believe this is real and serious, but only 29% of the people out there know that. So most people, 70% of the people, don't even know that, Barbara.
You know, the thing that I kept on coming back to was he kept on saying, well, we did this in World War II, we can do this again. And I thought to myself, yes, theoretically, but the difference is that in World War II, we responded because something catastrophic happened. They bombed Pearl Harbor.
Exactly.
And we went, oh my God, we have to immediately protect ourselves. We don't have anything of the same magnitude that is hitting us about the climate crisis. What we have is regional events, a flood here, a tornado there, a terrible hurricane down there. But there's not one big galvanizing catastrophe that is like a bombing of the Pearl Harbor to galvanize public behavior and public opinion.
Well, in business, that's called the burning platform.
Right.
The critical thing that makes the future different.
Yeah.
I
would say that, Pam, that my comment before was it was a combination of things. It was the big event, like Pearl Harbor, what you're saying, but I do believe that the big event happening now doesn't create the same response that it did 50, 70, or 80 years ago because society has changed. So that was my point about polio. Even after World War II, you had people who respected science, who respected mainstream thought, and the need of citizenry to all pull together. That doesn't exist now, and that's frustrating.
Right.
Yeah, I think we need the Potomac River to totally flood Washington, D.C. so that they're wading through water in the Capitol. But even then, I'm thinking that it needs to affect the people in Congress.
And to that point, I've been focusing on the issue of electrification of buses, and I've been reading a lot of plans from different agencies. And what impressed me was I read the New York CTA plan, and they started out for their entire budget and capital plan with pictures of how Hurricane Sandy flooded their subways. And then they linked that to, we need to do everything we can to reduce greenhouse gases. And so they're spending over $1 billion to electrify their fleet. So then you move inland to a city like Chicago, and they have language like, well, transit by its very nature just helps reduce greenhouse gases, but we don't really have to adopt, have electric buses. That we're a minor contributor. So it's a lot like guns, and it's a lot like until you've been involved and your life has been at stake, you're not going to take this seriously. And that's the problem.
Yeah, we can ban books, but not guns. It's no problem. Right? All right. So wrapping things up, speaking of the 70s thinking, Bruce, he says, it's not the 70s anymore. We're not facing 70s energy problem that we can solve with efficiency. We need transformation. 70s thinking focus on lots of small decisions and distracts us from the big picture. 70s thinking muddles the thermodynamic efficiency with energy saved through behavior change.
Mhm.
And it leads to a narrative of deprivation. You can't eat those hamburgers. No, don't eat hamburgers. Those climate people don't want you to eat hamburgers, right? The worst thing that we could be saying, even though we should cut back on meat for our own health, right? The thinking leads to a 70s thinking, doing less is bad, not doing more is good, building a good into the way we do everything. And climate conscious decisions. Worry about your personal infrastructure, your transportation infrastructure, your electrical infrastructure, your personal comfort infrastructure, like the HVAC systems that heat your house, infrastructure in your kitchen, laundry and basement, your personal storage, such as you may want a battery system. In the future, we're going to have intermittent energy, and that's going to be good for your home and good for the wider population to be able to have virtual power plants. Pam, you've been talking to David, right? He's a guy who runs virtual power plant company. This is the future. Decentralized energy generation with virtual power plants, your community's infrastructure, and your personal dietary infrastructure. And to wrap this up, he says a mortgage is a time machine. With fossil fuels, you have to save now and pay later. You save now and pay later. With renewables, you pay now and save later, including the planet. Most families currently can't afford the upfront cost of that new EV, decarbonizing, getting the induction stove. Hey, this stuff can be expensive, right? If policymakers can offer climate loans at right rates, the transition to clean energy will start to happen, saving us money. Of course, the Infrastructure Act and the IRA helps with some of this, but it's not enough.
But you know, Tom, that statement was the most useful piece of the book for me.
Yeah.
Climate loans that would allow people to borrow money to do these things at a lower rate, which would then be an incentive to get people to switch to clean energy. The idea of climate loans should have been in the IRA. Yes.
And then that's really, we're only, this was on page 125, but most of what we talked about was really in the first 50 pages of the book, because he started going into all kinds of engineering detail that, I just didn't think would be key to tonight. But, I hope it was good conversation. And I'm thinking that, what's our next book? We don't have to decide tonight, but I will send these slides to you all, and you can look at these, maybe study it a little bit, decides what you might want to vote for, and I'll put a vote out on what book we should pick for next time. And then who wants to raise their hand to lead the next book club meeting? Not me, probably, right? So here's the suggestion: Under a White Sky, very popular. Hot House Earth, I read it, it's great. Win Every Argument. This is not about climate change, although he talks about climate change. Mehdi Hasan, he's often on MSNBC, is a skilled debater, persuader, and public speaker, which is something we do, and he can be helpful to. Train Your Brain, Climate Book. That's a new one of a bunch of essays from Greta Thunberg and a bunch of scientists. They Left One Tree, Regeneration, On Fire, and whatever else you guys think.
I think we read parts of Regeneration when it came out. Remember, it was like the drawdown book. It was in the same format.
Yeah.
Should I take that off? Because I didn't remember if we had gone.
Yeah, I think you should take that off. And I want to just put in a big plug for what I've heard about Under a White Sky.
Well, she is very good. She writes for the New York.
Yeah. So have you read it all, Pam?
No, I haven't. I just bought it.
Okay. Yeah, I certainly think that's a good one.
Do you want to lead the discussion on that?
Who, me?
Yeah, you.
Well, I'm not gonna put up slides though.
We don't need slides. You know me, I have to have slides or else.
Okay, yeah, I mean, I'll do it if I don't have to do PowerPoint.
We could do a whiteboard at the same time as you're
You could
talking.
lead the discussion. Knowing you, you'll have notes though.
I'll have notes, yeah, under a white sky. Well,
So-
when are we doing it?
It's about 6 weeks from now.
And does this time work for people?
Yeah.
Wednesday at
It's good according to the CRP calendar, you know,
Mhm.
yeah, because
not a lot going on.
there may be some Wednesday night meetings.
So
So
is this in May, like the second week of May,
Second or third week, yeah.
May 10th or May 17th?
There are other meetings for our chapter on the 10th and the 17th. There's a suburban climate team on the 10th. There's a solar team on the 17th.
On Wednesday?
24th.
Yeah,
On that Wednesday, really?
yeah.
Oh, that's new.
What
'Cause
about the 24th? Is there something then?
No. The 24th, which is the fourth Wednesday, there's nothing at 6 o'clock.
So it'd be the 4th, the 24th, the fourth Wednesday of
May.
May. I'll put that in the notes. Pam, you'll call the meeting? Because I don't have a recurring meeting on the calendar. I just did this.
Yeah, but can you give me the list you used to send out the invitation?
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
And it's good to see Barbara and Catherine here.
Yeah,
We
Sorry,
see
I was late.
the same old faces, and it's nice to get some new people and new opinions.
well, hey, you know, I hope it went pretty well. And thanks a lot. Pam, you'll call
Yeah,
the next meeting.
Catherine and Barbara, I hope you'll do it May 24th.
I've got it down.
I want to read that book. I gave it to my daughter who's cross country, but she's coming home for Easter, so I'll have her bring the book.
Yeah,
Okay.
In the
Okay.
Yeah.
notes, Pam, in the notes, I'll say that that's our next one. And
Okay,
and
under
you'll
a
call the
white
meeting.
sky. Okay,
I presume it's on Kindle, right?
probably, I don't know.
Probably, yeah. I mean,
yeah. I read all these on Kindle, so.
Yeah.
Great.
I guess
Um,
we're done.
yeah, thank you,
Yeah.
Tom.
Thank
Okay.
you.
Thanks, Tom.
Thank you. It was great.
Thanks.